The conference room smelled of stale coffee and broken promises. I sat across from Marcus Webb, Innovatech's chief technology officer, watching him shuffle papers like a dealer at a casino where the house always wins. His expensive watch caught the fluorescent light as he cleared his throat. Alexis, I'm afraid we have to discuss your position here. 8 years. 8 years of 14-hour days, missed family dinners, and weekends spent in the lab perfecting algorithms that would become the backbone of Innovatech's flagship product, the neural core processor. 8 years of innovation that generated $247 million in revenue last quarter alone. And now Marcus couldn't even look me in the eye. The board has decided to restructure the R&D division, he continued, his voice carrying that corporate flatness reserved for delivering bad news. Your role is being eliminated effective immediately. I felt the blood drain from my face, but kept my voice steady. Eliminated? Marcus, the Q3 launch of Neural Core 2.0 is in 6 weeks. The entire architecture depends on the compression algorithm I developed. We appreciate your contributions, of course. He slid a manila envelope across the polished table. HR has prepared a comprehensive severance package. Very generous, considering the circumstances. Generous. The word tasted bitter. I opened the envelope with hands that refused to shake, scanning the legal document inside. 3 months' salary, healthcare through December, and a non-compete clause that would effectively bar me from working in neural processing for 2 years. Standard corporate execution. I don't understand, I said, though part of me was beginning to. My performance reviews have been exemplary. The team I built has out-delivered every milestone. The patent application for the adaptive neural pathway compression will vest with the company as planned, Marcus interrupted. That was always the intention, Alexis. Company resources, company time, company intellectual property. There it was. The real reason. Patent application US 20240156789, filed 18 months ago, was scheduled to be approved within the next 30 days. Once granted, it would give Innovatech exclusive rights to the core technology that made our processors 340% more efficient than anything else on the market. Technology one had conceived, developed, and refined entirely on my own. I see. I closed the envelope and stood up. I'll need to collect my personal items. Security will escort you. Standard procedure. Marcus finally met my eyes, and I saw something there. Not guilt exactly, but the uncomfortable awareness of a man who knew he was participating in something fundamentally wrong. For what it's worth, Alexis, you're a brilliant engineer. This isn't personal. But it was personal. Every line of code, every breakthrough, every late night when I chose the lab over my own life, it had all been deeply, intimately personal. And now they were erasing me from the story entirely. 20 minutes later, I stood in the parking garage with a cardboard box containing 8 years of my professional life. A wilted succulent, 3 technical manuals, and a photo of our team celebrating the first successful neural core prototype. I looked young in that picture, eager, believing that good work would be rewarded with loyalty. How naive. The drive home gave me time to think. My townhouse in Palo Alto, purchased with stock options that had vested over 5 years, suddenly felt like a monument to misplaced trust. I'd always prided myself on being practical, methodical, the kind of engineer who documented everything and never left details to chance. That attention to detail was about to become my salvation. I poured myself a glass of wine and opened my laptop. If Marcus thought he could simply erase my contributions, he had underestimated exactly how methodical I could be. My personal cloud storage contained 6 years of detailed development logs, dating back to my first conceptual sketches of adaptive neural pathway compression. I'd always backed up my work to my personal accounts, not out of paranoia, but out of the engineer's instinct to never lose valuable data. Now, scrolling through hundreds of files, I began to see the full scope of what I'd preserved. The earliest entries were from March 2018, when I'd first theorized that neural processing efficiency could be dramatically improved by dynamically compressing data pathways based on usage patterns. My initial sketches, time-stamped and auto-saved, showed crude diagrams that would eventually evolve into the sophisticated architecture powering every neural core processor. But it was a file dated September 15, 2019, that made me sit up straighter. A detailed technical specification I'd written for what I'd called the adaptive compression engine. The heart of the technology Marcus claimed belonged entirely to Innovatech. The document was watermarked with my personal system's metadata, created at 11:47 p.m. on a Sunday when I was working from home, using my own software and development environment. I kept digging. Email threads from 2020 where I'd pitched the compression concept to Marcus and the engineering team. My personal notebook scans showing mathematical proofs I'd worked out over morning coffee. Version control logs from my home development setup, where I'd prototyped the first working implementation. Most importantly, I found the signed copy of my employment agreement from 2016. Section 4.2 dealt with intellectual property rights, and I read it with the careful attention of someone whose professional life depended on understanding every clause. Employee agrees to assign to company all rights to inventions conceived or developed using company resources, facilities, or proprietary information. Inventions developed independently, using personal resources and not relating to company's current or reasonably anticipated future business interests, remain the property of employee. The compression algorithm had been conceived during those late-night sessions at home, using my personal equipment, before I'd ever discussed it with anyone at Innovatech. The early development work, the mathematical foundations, the core algorithms, the initial prototypes, had all been done independently. Only later, when Innovatech had shown interest, had I integrated it into their product development cycle. I reached for my phone and dialed a number I'd hoped never to use. Catherine Reeves, patent attorney, came the crisp voice after 2 rings. Catherine, it's Alexis Monroe. We met at the Silicon Valley Women in Tech conference last year. Alexis, I remember. How's life at Innovatech? Complicated, I said. I think I need a lawyer. Catherine's office in downtown San Francisco occupied the 32nd floor of a glass tower that seemed to pierce the morning fog. She was exactly as I remembered. Sharp-eyed, elegantly professional, with a kind of focused intensity that made million-dollar deals possible. Tell me everything, she said after pouring coffee into cups that probably cost more than most people's monthly car payments. I laid out the timeline methodically, the way I'd approach debugging a complex system. The early development work at home. The company's gradual adoption of my technology. The patent application filed in my name as co-inventor alongside 2 other engineers who'd worked on implementation details. And finally, the termination that had come just weeks before the patent was scheduled to be granted. Catherine took notes in precise handwriting, occasionally asking clarifying questions that revealed her deep understanding of intellectual property law. The key issue, she said when I'd finished, is proving independent development of the core technology. If we can establish that the fundamental algorithms were created using your personal resources, we have a strong case for retained ownership rights. I have documentation going back to the original conception, I said. Time-stamped files, development logs, email correspondence. I've always been meticulous about records. Good. That meticulousness may save your career. She leaned back in her chair. Here's what I think happened. Innovatech's legal team realized that your patent application, as written, might give you more ownership rights than they're comfortable with. So they eliminated the problem by eliminating you. The casual brutality of it was breathtaking. Can they do that? They can terminate employment for almost any reason in California. But they can't steal your intellectual property in the process. Catherine's smile had sharp edges. The question is, what do you want to do about it? I thought about Marcus's uncomfortable expression in the conference room. About the team I'd built and trained, now scrambling to understand systems I'd designed. About the Neural Core 2.0 launch that would generate hundreds of millions in revenue from technology I'd created. I want justice, I said. And I want them to understand that brilliant engineers aren't disposable. Catherine nodded. Then let's get to work. The next 6 weeks were a masterclass in strategic patience. While Innovatech scrambled to prepare for their Neural Core 2.0 launch without my institutional knowledge, I methodically built my case. Catherine introduced me to forensic IT specialists who could verify the authenticity and timestamps of my development files. We hired technical experts to review my documentation and confirm the independent development timeline. Most importantly, we discovered that Innovatech had already begun licensing the compression technology to third parties based on the pending patent. 3 major tech companies had signed preliminary agreements worth a combined $89 million in licensing fees, all predicated on Innovatech's exclusive ownership of the adaptive compression algorithm. They're generating revenue from your work before the patent is even granted, Catherine observed during one of our weekly strategy sessions. That gives us additional leverage. I watched through industry publications and LinkedIn as Innovatech's marketing machine shifted into high gear. Trade magazine covers featured the Neural Core 2.0, with headlines like Revolutionary Efficiency Breakthrough and The Future of Neural Processing. Marcus gave interviews where he described the compression technology as a fundamental leap forward in the field, never once mentioning my name. It stung, but it also strengthened my resolve. They wanted to erase me from the story? Let them build their entire future on that erasure. On October 15th, U.S. Patent 11,789,234 was officially granted. The abstract read, Systems and Methods for Adaptive Neural Pathway Compression in Distributed Processing Environments. Listed inventors, Alexis Monroe, Trevor Kim, and Nathan Cross, though my former colleagues had contributed only implementation details to algorithms I'd conceived and developed independently. The patent grant triggered the next phase of Catherine's strategy. Now we file, she said, sliding a thick legal document across her desk. Patent infringement lawsuit against Innovatech, plus claims for misappropriation of trade secrets and breach of fiduciary duty. I read through the filing, seeing my work translated into legal language that carried the weight of federal law. We weren't just claiming ownership of the compression algorithm. We were demanding an injunction that would halt all production and licensing of products incorporating my technology. What's their likely response? I asked. They'll claim the work was done for hire, that company resources were used, that you were paid to develop this technology. Catherine's expression was confident. But your documentation trail is exceptionally strong. The early development work was clearly independent, and the employment agreement language supports your retention of rights. And if we win? Given their product roadmap and licensing agreements, damages could reach 9 figures. Plus, the injunction would force them to either negotiate a licensing deal with you or completely re-engineer their flagship product line. 9 figures. I thought about my severance package, 3 months' salary that Innovatech had considered generous. The irony was almost amusing. The lawsuit made headlines in the tech industry within hours of filing. Former Innovatech engineer claims patent rights to core technology, led the morning briefing on TechCrunch. By afternoon, Innovatech's stock had dropped 12%. My phone rang constantly. Reporters, former colleagues, headhunters who suddenly remembered my name. I ignored most of them, but I did take a call from Lin Zhang, one of the engineers I'd mentored during my years at Innovatech. Alexis, I can't believe they did this to you, she said, her voice carefully modulated for a conversation that might be monitored. The whole team is struggling without your guidance. The 2.0 launch has been challenging. I'm sure you'll figure it out, I said diplomatically. Actually, that's why I'm calling. Marcus asked me to reach out. He wants to discuss a potential resolution. I almost laughed. 6 weeks ago, Marcus had been unable to look me in the eye while delivering my termination notice. Now, facing a lawsuit that threatened his company's entire product strategy, he wanted to talk. Tell Marcus he can call Catherine Reeves if he has settlement proposals to discuss, I said. Her number is on the legal filing. The call came 2 days later. Catherine had put her phone on speaker so I could listen to Marcus's voice, tight with stress and corporate desperation. We believe there's been a misunderstanding about ownership rights, he began. Innovatech invested significant resources in developing and refining Dr. Monroe's initial concepts. My client's documentation clearly establishes independent development of the core algorithms, Catherine replied. Your company's resources were applied to implementation and refinement, but the fundamental intellectual property belongs to Dr. Monroe. We're prepared to discuss a licensing arrangement, Marcus said. Something that recognizes both parties' contributions. What sort of arrangement? A 5% royalty on products incorporating the compression technology, plus recognition of Dr. Monroe as co-inventor on future patents. I shook my head. Catherine had warned me about lowball opening offers. My client's technology enables the entire neural core product line, Catherine said. Without the compression algorithm, your processors would be 340% less efficient than current specifications. 5% doesn't reflect the actual value contribution. The negotiation continued for 20 minutes, with Marcus gradually increasing the royalty percentage while adding restrictions and limitations. Catherine parried each proposal with calm professionalism, never revealing our actual settlement requirements. When the call ended, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and disappointment. Satisfaction that Marcus was finally acknowledging my contributions. Disappointment that it had taken a federal lawsuit to achieve that recognition. "They're scared," Catherine observed. The discovery process alone would be devastating for their public image. A jury seeing 8 years of exemplary performance reviews followed by termination just before a major patent grant? That narrative practically writes itself. But I wasn't interested in destroying Innovatech out of spite. I wanted justice, not revenge. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. On November 8th, my former colleague Trevor Kim, one of the co-inventors on the patent, reached out through encrypted email. "Alexis, I've been following the lawsuit coverage. There are things you should know about internal discussions before your termination. Can we meet confidentially?" We met at a coffee shop in Mountain View, far from Innovatech's corporate campus. Trevor looked uncomfortable, glancing around the cafe like he expected corporate security to materialize from behind the espresso machine. "Marcus didn't just terminate you for restructuring," he said without preamble. "There were board discussions about the patent ownership issue months before you were fired." "What kind of discussions?" Legal reviewed the original patent application and realized the independent development documentation might give you ownership claims. The board decided the cleanest solution was to eliminate you before the patent was granted, then argue that all development work was done for hire. I felt my jaw tighten. "They planned this." "There are emails," Trevor continued. "Internal legal correspondence discussing strategies to minimize your ownership claims. I saved copies before they locked down my access to the legal folders." He slid a flash drive across the table. "I know testifying against the company could cost me my job, but what they did to you was wrong. You built that team, developed that technology, and they just erased you." The files on Trevor's flash drive were devastating. Email threads between Marcus, the legal department, and HR discussing the Alexis situation. Memos analyzing the intellectual property implications of my continued employment. A timeline showing that the decision to terminate me had been made in August, almost 3 months before I was actually fired. Most damning was an email from Marcus to the company's chief legal officer. "The Monroe problem needs to be resolved before patent grant. Eliminating her position removes any ambiguity about ownership rights and sends a clear message about IP expectations." The Monroe problem. 8 years of innovation and dedication, reduced to a problem requiring elimination. Catherine reviewed the documents with the focused intensity of a surgeon examining X-rays. "This changes everything," she said. "These emails establish premeditated action to deprive you of patent rights. That's not just breach of contract, it's potentially criminal fraud." "What does that mean for the case?" "It means Innovatech's legal team will recommend immediate settlement rather than risk these documents becoming public record during discovery." Catherine's smile was predatory. "They just handed us complete leverage." The settlement negotiations took place in a conference room that could have housed a small aircraft. Innovatech's legal team, 6 attorneys led by a senior partner whose hourly rate probably exceeded most people's monthly salaries, sat across from Catherine and me like a defensive line protecting Marcus and 2 other executives I didn't recognize. The lead attorney, a silver-haired man named Philip Jacobson, opened with corporate boilerplate about mutual respect and shared interests. Catherine cut through the pleasantries with surgical precision. "Our client possesses documentation of deliberate conspiracy to deprive her of patent ownership rights," she said, sliding a folder across the table. "Internal emails planning her termination specifically to eliminate IP claims. This goes well beyond wrongful termination into potential criminal fraud territory." I watched Marcus's face drain of color as Jacobson reviewed the documents Trevor had provided. The comfortable arrogance that had characterized my termination meeting was completely absent now. "These documents were obtained through unauthorized access to company systems," Jacobson said weakly. "These documents were provided by a current employee with legitimate access," Catherine corrected. "And they demonstrate a pattern of deliberate deception that will be very compelling to a jury." The room fell silent except for the subtle hum of air conditioning and the distant sounds of San Francisco traffic 32 floors below. "What are your client's settlement requirements?" Jacobson asked finally. Catherine opened her leather portfolio with deliberate care. Complete assignment of patent 11,789,234 to Dr. Monroe. Licensing agreement granting Innovatech non-exclusive rights to use the technology in current product lines for 15% royalty on net revenue. Immediate cessation of all exclusive licensing agreements with third parties. And 7 figures in damages for lost compensation and professional harm. Marcus leaned forward. That would essentially give Dr. Monroe control over our entire neural core product line. Dr. Monroe developed the technology that makes your product line possible, Catherine replied. Your company chose to eliminate her rather than honor legitimate ownership rights. These are the consequences of that decision. The negotiation continued for 6 hours, with Innovatech's team gradually accepting each of our major demands while quibbling over implementation details. By evening, we had reached an agreement that would fundamentally restructure the relationship between my technology and Innovatech's business. Patent ownership would transfer to me within 30 days. Innovatech would pay $2.3 million in damages and legal fees. Most importantly, they would acknowledge my sole inventorship of the adaptive compression algorithm in all future publications and marketing materials. But the real victory was subtler. The settlement gave me control over licensing the technology to competitors, effectively making me a power player in the neural processing industry overnight. 6 months later, I stood in the lobby of Adaptive Neural Systems, the company I'd founded with my settlement money and venture capital funding secured through Catherine's connections. The space was smaller than Innovatech's sprawling campus, but it hummed with the focused energy of engineers who owned equity in their work. Trevor Kim had joined as VP of Engineering after Innovatech's inevitable layoffs began. Lin Zhang headed our algorithm development team. 3 other former Innovatech employees had followed, bringing institutional knowledge that complemented my intellectual property. The Samsung licensing deal closed this morning, Trevor reported during our weekly executive meeting. That brings us to $47 million in committed licensing revenue for the next 3 years. I nodded, reviewing the growth projections Catherine's firm had prepared. Companies across the tech industry were lining up to license compression technology that would make their processors more efficient. The 15% royalty Innovatech paid on their neural core sales was just one revenue stream among many. More satisfying than the financial success was the team we'd built. Engineers who understood that innovation required both technical brilliance and ethical leadership. People who would never have to worry about being erased from their own success stories. My phone buzzed with a news alert. Innovatech stock drops 23% following Q3 earnings. Mississippi. The company was struggling without the technical leadership they'd so casually discarded. Marcus had been replaced as CTO 6 weeks earlier, part of a broader management shakeup as the board scrambled to address declining market share. I felt no satisfaction in their struggles. Only the quiet confidence that came from building something better. There's one more item, Lynn said, sliding a document across the conference table. Patent application for the next-generation compression algorithms. The ones we developed for the aerospace contracts. I reviewed the filing, noting that all 4 co-inventors were current ANS employees who would retain ownership rights according to our employee agreement. No one would ever wake up to discover their life's work had been stolen overnight. Looks good, I said. File it under our standard inventor retention policy. The meeting continued for another hour, covering product development timelines and customer deliverables. Normal business discussions for a company built on the radical premise that brilliant engineers deserved ownership of their innovations. 2 years after my termination, I received an unexpected email from Marcus Webb. He'd landed a position at a smaller tech company in Austin, a significant step down from his former role at Innovatech. Alexis, I wanted to reach out personally to acknowledge that your termination was handled poorly. I hope you understand it was never personal. Just business decisions made under board pressure. I'm glad to see your success with ANS. Perhaps we could grab coffee next time I'm in the Bay Area? I stared at the message for several minutes, remembering the conference room where he delivered my termination notice with corporate efficiency. The nervous energy in his voice when he'd called to discuss settlement terms. The gradual recognition in his eyes that he'd underestimated exactly how thorough my documentation had been. Marcus, I typed back. I appreciate your message. The experience taught me valuable lessons about the importance of protecting intellectual property and treating technical talent with respect. ANS has grown substantially, partly by licensing the compression technology to companies seeking alternatives to Innovatech's offerings. I wish you well in your new role. I didn't mention coffee. Some bridges, once burned, shouldn't be rebuilt. The real measure of success wasn't revenge against former colleagues. It was the company we'd built on principles of ethical innovation and shared ownership. Adaptive Neural Systems now employed 47 engineers and had licensing agreements with major technology companies across 3 continents. The compression algorithms I developed in my townhouse were powering everything from smartphones to supercomputers. Most importantly, every ANS employee owned equity in their innovations. No one would ever face the choice between their technical contributions and their livelihood. Standing in my office overlooking the South Bay, I reflected on the journey from that humiliating termination meeting to this moment of quiet triumph. The patent papers framed on my wall weren't monuments to revenge. They were reminders that brilliant work, properly documented and ethically protected, would always find its true value. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the engineering floor, where my team was solving problems that would shape the future of neural processing. Their innovations would be protected, their contributions acknowledged, their success shared. That was the best revenge of all. Building something better.